Hello and merry meet. I'm Lady Tehila from the Coven of the Open Mind, and you're watching Wicca and Witchcraft 101. Hail and welcome. This is lecture 10, and today we are talking about divination. What it is, how to do it, what it's not, okay? It's not fortune telling, and what the different tools are, and how you can get started working on divination in your own practices. I want to start with witchy traditions and conceptions, talk a little bit more about differences in practice and belief. We got into it a little bit at the end of the previous lecture where we talked about tools, how different traditions will use different materials and have different beliefs about what each tool means and what element it aligns with and that sort of thing. We'll talk about that a little bit more here today. And then we're going to dive into divination. So first, let's talk a little bit about witchy traditions and the many, many conceptions that there are in witchcraft about how to use the tools and what materials to use and what they should look like. There's no central authority in Wicca or witchcraft, and so there's a great diversity in the practice and the belief that you'll find from one witch to the next. So for one thing, people will believe that tools need to be made of certain materials for various reasons. Some will say that the wand has to be made of certain kinds of wood. They'll choose willow, cherry, apple, or oak are very common for like life aligned. You're invoking divinity, that sort of thing. Yew is a more common one in Norse traditions. You'll find different kinds of wood prescribed for different reasons, often based around the person whose writings and their personal relationship with that particular kind of tree. But really, that's what it should be, okay? It should be how you connect to the wood. So you should read a bunch of different accounts about what people believe they should make these tools out of and why. And then spend time with different trees and different materials and try different things on your altar, or go to rituals with different kinds of covens and just experience these different tools in action so that you can see what would work for you. They have all of these preferences about all these different kinds of material. Some say the athame has to be specific types of metal. Iron is a common one because it's very resonant. Silver is common as well. Gold. All for life magic is mostly the ones shown in the example in the slide. It's more common to see copper or bronze for people doing death magic and that sort of thing. Some will believe that tools need to be customized, that even if you're gifted them or you find them even at like a thrift shop or somewhere, if you order them online, once they arrive, you have to customize them in some way, make them yours. Some physical mark that makes it yours so that you could always pick it out of a lineup. So some say that that is a requirement to empowering the tools and a part of the consecration process. Some will consecrate the tool with the wand, believing that the wand, that they're invoking divinity into the tool and that's the energy they're putting into it to denote it as sacred. So for them, if consecration is an invocative activity, they'll use the wand. It's a lot more common to see people use the blade, dagger, or the sword, because it's viewed as them taking their intent to use that tool in a magical way and putting it into the item. They may invoke divinity to do the consecration. That does happen pretty commonly, but just as commonly not. And it's really usually seen as a form of enchantment, a form of putting your energy into an item, which we'll talk about in one of the next chapters coming up. Some will limit how much metal is found on the altar. We may have mentioned this last time. Some will limit the amount of metal to the athame, maybe a chalice. They'll use different kinds of metal that resonate together, that have the right kind of vibrations to make the entire altar have the overall energy that it needs. But it's often seen to be like, all the different sources of metal on the altar resonate differently, and they can constructively or destructively interfere with each other. So you would choose your metals selectively because of how high resonance they are. Some will say that about crystals as well, and all sorts of things. But for metals, it's more common, and often the only metal on the altar is the athame. That's very traditional. The cauldron is often the main focal point of the altar year-round in a bunch of traditions, especially Celtic traditions that center around the theme of transformation. Sometimes in Norse, like heathen traditions, which center around the act of Odin going into the cauldron and bathing in feminine energy in order to learn Seder. And for them, this cauldron may be the focal point, and they may have a cauldron that's made of very high quality metal. Copper is common for those kind of cauldrons. They often will burn oils in them, and some will use like iron cauldrons, and some will have a lot of different cauldrons based on what they're going to use them for and what they're going to burn in them, or if they're going to scry in them, or however they're going to use them. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's no one Wiccan way to do things. We've made that very clear now. But let's talk about some specific differences in practice and belief. Things that may inform your choice of tools and your choice of what kind of witch you'd like to be and what aesthetic you'd like. So, for one thing, a lot of witches will shoot their spells out all in one big burst, and they believe that that has more power that way. They'll often make use of something called the cone of power. We'll talk about that in the next series of lectures where we talk about evocation magic. And some of people will prefer to do spells that build up over time, and they may use candles differently. They will have a candle that is a little spell candle that they just burn all in one go, and when it's gone, that's the end of that spell session. Some of them will have like a nice big candle. They'll etch symbols into it. They'll burn it slowly over time. Every time it comes up to them, I need to burn the candle. I need to think about this. I need to put my energy on this. They'll burn the candle. That's another way of doing spells. And both of those ways of doing spell work and raising energy are equally valid. So you'll find some witches will do both of those at different times or together even. They'll combine them. But a lot of witches tend to have a preference for all sorts of things follow from this preference, right? So like, how do they use candles? Do they keep the little kinds of spell candles in the house, or is etching a candle a main part of the preparation for their spells? Do they tend to like have a part of the ritual where they build energy up with chanting and dancing, and then they shoot that energy out in one big burst? And then it kind of feels like the ritual's over and the rest of it's like almost for show, right? So that's like how I do ritual. That's very traditional Wiccan. But some people will instead not really spend that much time on it, or they'll kind of just say a few words. Maybe they'll sing a song or raise some energy of some kind, set the tone for that energy, and then come back to it in future rituals or throughout the full moons or even in a daily practice. So there's really just kind of two kinds of witches. The kind that bursts energy out and is a little more chaotic in that sense, where they do ritual, you know, maybe according to astrology or some ordered process, but it's not like something that's routine necessarily, that they do every single day with the same purpose in mind. And then you'll have the kinds of witches that, you know, where every day is a ritual for them. So that is one of the different aesthetics, different kinds of witches that you'll see. One of the biggest differences is how they do spell work, how they use candles, right? It all comes down to that. Another one is how membership is denoted in an organization. Some organizations don't denote membership. You are a member if you want to be, and if you leave, you leave. Some will give cords or robes or all manner of things, tools. So there's different ways to be recognized as a member in a lineage. People will use different kinds of headdresses, style, shapes, different, whether they use it at all, different symbols. Headdresses are very common for the high priest and high priestess to wear to set them apart from other people in large group rituals. So what kind of headdresses they're going to wear. Some will opt for that more like animalistic style, like classic Cartomancy and Pan. Like they'll have like horns on their heads, you know, especially for like the harvest holidays. Some people have the half moon, full moon, right? The goddess symbol, the blessed bee. Some people have that on the headdress for the high priestess. Some people use crowns, different kinds of tassels, or ribbons. Then there's differences in practice that come with aligning the different tools. Okay, so brooms will often be aligned differently. Some align them with spirit because they purify a space. They're a divine tool. They're a representation of the combination between masculine and feminine bound together with the cord. So some will align them with spirit. Some will align them with water because water purifies and cleanses. Some don't view spirit as an element that things can align to because it's too abstract. And you'll find more often that they align tools with just the four earth, earth, air, fire, and water. And then the noisemakers, some will just put them all under air because air is noise. It makes noise. So it goes in air. Some will be like, okay, no. This kind of noisemaker is water. This kind of noisemaker is air. This kind of noisemaker is fire. Most people believe that ascending tones are purifying and descending tones are banishing. The two sides of cleansing or banishing, right? Bringing in positive energy to send negative energy out, or sending negative energy out to bring in positive energy, right? Two sides of the same action. Many will say are represented by ascending or descending scales. Some draw a doorway into their circle and leave it there all the time, and that's always where the doorway is, and they'll mark it and everything. And some will just do cast circle, and then if they need a doorway, they'll cut one. That's probably more common. I'm not sure which is more traditional. That's a good debate for people that are nerds and read all the literature like I do. If you know which one is more traditional, let me know. Okay, so differences in belief. Are the tools just things? Are they just things that you find outside or at the store and they're just items? Or are they representations of divinity, and they ought to be treated as such, and they should be expensive, and you should buy them or be gifted them? And they have inherent power, and you can't lose them or replace them. Some people believe that. Some people believe that divinity is really in the tools. Most people believe the tools are just a thing. You use the energy and bring the energy through you, and you use the thing to concentrate and help you focus and help you visualize, and it's just a tool. That's what most people would believe. Do you use set deities within each ritual? Or do you call upon different aspects of divinity depending on what you're doing or what time of year it is? Do you use the same kinds at the same times of year? Different traditions have different traditions, right? That's why they're called what they are called. Does the dark moon have power? Is it chaos aligned? Is it death aligned? Does it influence you at all? Can you do magic on a dark moon? All of those things nobody agrees upon. Different covens within lineages will have different beliefs about that. I met a Gardnerian coven. She was the witch queen of the Gardnerian line in America. And her coven, they would do magic on a dark moon if they had to, but they would not plan for it. And they would pull the energy from the waxing or the waning phase. So they would always say that it was either waning or waxing. It was never completely dark. So that was how they handled that, which is probably true. I mean, it's never completely dark, I guess. But I've met other covens that just avoid magic on the dark moon altogether, and they believe that magic is for full moons. And if you can't wait until a full moon to do the magic, then you're being impatient and you're not understanding what it is the universe is trying to give you. They will occasionally do magic like on a waxing moon, but for waxing, they'll always make sure that the purpose of the spell aligns with the phase of the moon. So we're going to talk about that in depth when we talk about evocation magic and spell work and how the moon plays a role and what kinds of spells you would do at which phases. All of that in the next lectures. Should you do magic on a Sabbath? Some Wiccans believe that Sabbaths are for celebrating, they're for deities, and you should never ever do a spell in a Sabbath ritual because it's disrespectful to the gods for whom you're supposed to just give thanks. So that's a difference that is common enough to put in here. A lot of people do believe that in Wicca. Less witches will believe that. Most witches are bent on spell work and put spells in every ritual they do. I believe that you should do spells if you have a reason to do spells and you think it aligns with the stars and the energy of the celebration. For me, it's all about just feeling out what is in the stars and going with what feels right to you. But That'll just depend from group to group. And then some people believe the pentagram is automatically a protective symbol and it's fully charged with energy and you don't have to spend any time charging it or doing anything with it. It's just ready to be used to protect you and your home and your hearth. Some believe that just drawing the pentagram, the right side up one, brings protection. It has to have a circle around it. That's key. That represents the completion that comes from the elements combined, right? So it's really the theory of Wicca is derived from this pentagram with the circle around it. So that's like the symbol, and then everything else is derived from staring at it for too long. Do you know what I mean? So that's Wicca in a nutshell. So divination is really just a form of being prepared. It is not fortune telling. It is not predicting the future. It does involve looking at potential futures. It has a degree of prediction, and different methods are more predictive than others, as we'll see. But what you're really doing is asking for context from the past, the present, and the future. Some combination of that, depending on what energies you're using and what technique you're using. You're looking at what's going on in the world right now that could lead to these potential futures. What are the potential futures that could come about from the factors that are going on in the world right now? That is all life-based, looking at what's going on in the world around you. If you're looking at what happened in the past or what will certainly happen in the future, getting to that, I want to know the most likely outcome that is very likely, or let's say you do a rune cast and you get the weird symbol, spelled W-Y-R-D, weird. That often means inevitability or unavoidability. Maybe you'll want to call upon the ancestors to find out what is this unavoidable thing that's coming for me. So that will make use of death energy. So we'll talk about the difference between life and death energy and how they're used in divination. So divination can make use of different kinds of energy. What we're really just talking about is different ways to relate to existence as a whole, different like conceptualized bits of it. Okay, you have the stuff that is bound by time and the passage of time, things which experience changes over time, which is all of physical existence and physics. The earth you live on, the rocks beneath your feet, your body, goodness knows, is experiencing time. And then you have the force that is like the space between spaces, okay? The space between the passage of time. And that is like the uncertainty, okay? That is the timeless space where time is not passing because those things, they're less real. And in reality, when we experience this timeless energy, it really comes as a void of energy. It feels colder. There's less motion in the particles of air in that space. It's colder. It feels hollow. Sound travels more readily. It feels a little bit spooky. And we can interpret that energy according to lots of different ways. So we talked about the metaphysics in a past one, and we're going to talk about how to actually channel this energy into a specific type of spirit in a future one. For now, with divination, you're usually not calling upon a specific spirit. You're just calling upon the timeless nature of the energy. Sometimes it helps if someone's a medium and they work with like the dead already and they talk to family members who've passed on, or they have like a guardian angel, then it's often easier for those types of people to use death energy in their readings. And for people that use death energy in their readings, oracle cards are more common. They usually will use larger decks that have more cards. that require a little more interpretation, and they'll rely on the spirits. They may even hear the spirits speaking to them when they do readings. And those kinds of people are often called oracles, though it's very common to see that kind of practice in brujeria, which is like Hispanic witchcraft. A bruja is a witch. Okay. So with life energy, when you're doing the reading with life energy, you're astrally projecting. You're intuitively reading the cards. You're feeling the energy of the world. You're looking for things that are vibrant, that stand out to you. You're looking for patterns that represent things that you already know, that are in your unconscious mind, that you're aware of because you are one with the world. Really, we are one process experiencing itself. So on some level, you are transcendent. And you can be aware of what's going on the other side of the world. And you can be aware of all of the factors that go into what may come to pass. So when you're using life energy, you're looking for all the factors so that you can know what is the best outcome of all the outcomes that might happen. Death energy, when you're doing readings with death energy, you're doing the opposite of that, okay? You're taking your familiarity through family members or through your memories of death, whatever inspires you, whatever brings the death into your space or allows you to commune with it. You're using that timeless, formless energy to bring you some kind of knowledge about the past or the future in a conscious, compatible nature, right? A way that can be put to words. It's not just some vague vision that you had and then 5 months later you have deja vu. What's the point of that? That's not useful. So with divination that uses death energy, you're trying to induce visions of what will happen, the most likely thing, the things that are like, this is fated to be. And all the factors don't need to be known because one of the outcomes is very, very likely. Those are the times that, for the record, I have deja vu. I am a medium. I was born speaking to ghosts, and like that creepy kid from Signs was my spirit animal probably for some period of time when I was a child. But for me, it comes very naturally to speak to spirits and to have visions of the future. I have deja vu often, and I often will remember the visions and know that I've had them and know what's coming. Even sometimes having them will change the course of things. It's all very interesting. I would love to study it scientifically one day. People that would take me seriously, but anywho, that is how death energy works. It's very like it just comes to you at the weirdest time, and suddenly you just are like, I know the future. You just like have this vision. Often it comes to people in their sleep. People that work with death energy, it's very common to have prophetic dreams and to have visions in their sleep. Sometimes they will do seances or call upon the spirits of the dead and have visions then as well. And that's not the point of what they're doing, but they will have the visions then. So it's worth telling you that when people work with death energy, it can be a little more chaotic than life energy because it's less bound to physical existence. So it's inherently more chaotic. So keep that in mind. Okay. How do we predict an unpredictable future? So within Wicca and witchcraft, it is universally agreed upon that the future is not predetermined. If people did not think that if people thought the future was predetermined, they would not do spell work. They would not waste any time trying to influence the outcome if they didn't think they could influence the outcome. Because one of the requirements of magic is that you know the spell is going to work. You have to know it's going to work. There can be no doubt. So, as a point of fact, you obviously have to believe in magic to do spell work successfully. So, witches don't believe in a predetermined future, but they do believe in fate. So, what is fate in the absence of predetermination? Well, fate is something that is likely to be or predestined by the nature of a person's genetics, spiritual, physical. What are they given? What is the given? What are they born with? If they're super tall, they go into basketball, whatever, they're famous for being tall, you're going to be like, well, it was fate. Because they have always been tall, and from a young age, they've gravitated towards doing tall person things. If a person goes into politics, they have prominent Capricorn or Scorpio placement in their star chart, their natal star chart, you're going to say, well, it's fate, right? It's fate. They were predestined for politics as a person prone to, ambition or manipulation or what have you. Okay, so that's what we mean by fate. That it's likely to be a person was born with the required skills, or the required title in some cases, and that's what divination is all about, really. It's not about seeking a person's future or their fortune. It's about seeking a person's fate. It's about saying, what are the skills that you have? What do you bring to the table? What is the context, historical, current? What are all the factors that I can't consciously know, but that I maybe could unconsciously know if I were able to be aware of everything on a level that I consciously cannot be aware of it, because it doesn't make any conscious sense, okay? Time is a, timey-wimey, wobbly, whatever the Doctor Who line is. So you use that context to assess the possible outcomes and the factors that will lead to those outcomes, and what skills you have that can influence the outcome. And the kinds of questions that you're going to answer are things like, okay, what could be? What is likely to be? What part of this is unavoidable? So that am I wasting energy trying to avoid this when I should be doing something else? Tarot, runes, all could help you answer that question very easily, because probably you know the answer and you just don't want to admit it. That is what divination tools are for when you're using them within yourself, often just to help you be aware of the truth in a way that really helps you understand it and helps you know what to do and to feel confident doing what it is you should be doing. Okay? Once the question is posed, then you use the tool to help you identify patterns. And these represent your unconscious mind and the thoughts that you're having that are too big and too vast to be put to words very easily. And they bring what you already know into some level of conscious awareness in an ordered way that really just answers your question in the here and now. And that is the purpose of divination. And I know people who are writing papers on the subject in the psychology capacity, because it is very, very useful as a tool for bringing your unconsciousness to light, for revealing the shadow parts of you, the repressed deep levels of yourself that maybe you have trouble dealing with. Well, having a good relationship with your divination tool is therapy, okay? Your cards are your therapist when you're a witch. Your runestones, whatever you choose to use, that is your therapist. Your book of shadows is your journal, and your cards are your therapist. That's what they joke, they kid, but it really is therapeutic. And a lot of people really do find therapy in using divination tools, because it's just a way of knowing yourself and what you're thinking on a deeper level better. As with all religions, there are bad faith actors in Wicca and the greater, Hermetic community. There are people who call themselves psychics. There are grifters who have channels that do readings for people en masse or generically, or they say it's for you in particular, but they didn't actually spend any time getting to know your energy or caring about that at all. They're just doing it for views. People who make vague predictions, or who make predictions about things that are very, very good or very, very bad, or very, very likely to be, like certainties. You will die if you don't buy my crystals for $9.95. Okay. People who are selling other services. Okay, they're selling their services, banishings, attunements, and the like. Those are the ones you have to be wary of the most. Even witches think that fortune telling is a scam, by the way. Like, you have to be wary of people. But I'd say that witches probably have an easier time than most people identifying grifters in this capacity because of their own ability in the craft. They can see someone doing something and be like, dude, where did you like learn this? Like, what are you even doing right now? Is this even magic? Like, what are you doing? It's very easy to see when you yourself are an experienced practitioner. And then what to do about it could be the subject of a whole channel, probably. But anywho, be on the lookout, watch out. There are bad faith actors. As we say in Wicca, hearken not to others' greed. When ye are in need, hearken not to others' greed. Okay? That's what we say. If you're in need, the people that will truly help you should be doing it for free. If you're in need and it's not a luxury, then you need to find a community, a spiritual community that can be there for you and that you can be there for once you get well. And that is the healthier path than seeking out some person that promises you wellness for $9.95, right? So be wary, and you can listen to what they're saying and think about, if they recommend certain crystals, think about getting some, but just be careful. That's all. People are trying to sell you healings and things. People should charge for their time. People should and do charge for their time for courses, for healing sessions, for astrology readings. It takes time to do these things. It makes sense people charge for their time. Again, it's really just one of those things that's really nuanced. And it's like, okay, you know it when you see it, as long as you're paying attention and you're not letting your need hearken you to others' greed. That is the key. So if you're ever not sure, you can always ask me. You can always just put it in the comments and I'll tell you if someone's a scam or not. Because we don't charge for anything. I monetized our channel so that I could turn off the ads. Every time I post, I turn on monetization and then I turn off all the ads. I just don't want to watch ads when I watch my own content. Anywho. Okay, now we're going to go through the divination tools. So, divination tools, this is a high-level overview of each tool and when to use it. These tools are the subject of whole books, whole series. I urge you to seek out other creators to learn how they're using tools. Watch them do divination sessions. All of that is available all over the internet. We have a resource on our website. I'll put it in the comments. With an encyclopedia of what the tarot cards mean, and you could draw your own based on the artwork there. So if you can't buy it, don't think that means you can't do it. It just means that you have to create the tool yourself, which may even make it more powerful. So there's nothing stopping you. Okay. First, let's talk about tarot. Some pronounce it tarot, which is the French tarot. Okay. Tarot is more common pronunciation. In classic decks of tarot, you find 78 cards. It's 4 suits plus a major arcana. I think it's 20 or 22 cards in the major arcana. And the major arcana is the one that has the abstract and spiritual meanings to it. You'll find other decks like oracle decks. I have some behind me. This demon tarot is one. This is in a type of oracle deck that has more cards, and each of them has meanings that's influenced by something that's not the derivation that they use for the classic decks. For the classic decks, they're using the suits and the alignments with the suits with the elements and things that largely come from the writings of Cornelius Agrippa in the 1600s. The first tarot decks were published. We'll do the history of this in a future lecture, but they're published in like the 1800s. 1900s are very popular. And it's really important that you have a personal relationship with the deck. It's not like they all come with their own books that tell you how to use them. They come usually as a box, right? And they've got this book in it. You should just read that book like one time. Just read the book and then throw it away. That is what the High Priestess told me, who taught me most of the more advanced classes that I did for becoming a leader. She taught me to read the book and throw it away. But I don't believe in throwing away books. I still have mine. But I did only read it once. So that's good. But then you're supposed to sit and look at the artwork on each card and just meditate with it and form a relationship with it, so that when you see it in a spread, ideally you do not need to go to your Book of Shadows and look up what the cards mean. Sometimes you will have to, because you'll be like, why did these cards fall in this order? This doesn't make any sense to me. So there must be some like obscure meaning to one of these cards that I don't remember, that like my unconscious mind remembers but my conscious mind doesn't. Then you might go and review the book or your Book of Shadows, wherever you've written your notes about it. But for the most part, it's about your personal relationship, not whatever the book says. Tarot makes use of spreads. And spreads are things which tell you what each of the slots mean. And then you pick the card and you place it in one of the slots. And the slots will tell you if it's the past, the present, they'll have different slots for the future and the outcome. Because one of them will usually capture the most likely outcome, like what is going to be the complete summary of what happens here, and one will be like, okay, what are the possibilities? Sometimes you will have multiple futures and one outcome, and sometimes you'll have multiple outcomes and multiple futures, and that will depend on the significance of the spread that you're doing. The more cards in a spread, the more magnificent, the more is significant, the more important the meaning you derive from that session. So with tarot, it's a lot of cards, it's a lot of spreads, it's a lot of stuff, it's a lot of memorization. You have to know what everything means or have a relationship with every single one of these cards, which for those of us with bad memories can be difficult. But there's also a little less room for error. It's a little more precise, and tarot is really good for answering questions that are very well defined, where the outcome is not shrouded. If the outcome is uncertain and you're not leaving enough slots to cover all of the outcomes that could happen, so if your outcome is uncertain or you're doing the reading again and again and you're getting different answers, then try adding more slots for the outcomes in the future. Because it may be that it's less certain than you think and you're really not counting for all the facts and you just need more cards in your spread. So keep that in mind. Okay, that's tarot. Cartomancy is very similar. Classic cartomancy is you just grab a card deck and the suits, are again sort of derived from associations with the elements. And you can read most about cartomancy from Doreen Valiant's Natural Magic. She talks about it in a whole chapter. She breaks down what they all mean. I jotted down all of the different card meanings into my Book of Shadows. I've used it maybe twice. But it does come in handy when you're out and you're at like some campsite or you're at some event and someone is just like, man, I really wish I could figure that out, what I'm supposed to do, or have some idea of what to do here. Whip out your pack of cards, do a divination session. It's best for things that are more mundane, like day-to-day relationships and that sort of thing, because the cards don't have the major arcana. I was trying to find the picture. It's in the background of the slide, I guess. The cards don't have, the classic deck doesn't have the major arcana. So you don't have the abstract concepts that are captured by the major arcana. And that's why it's really for more mundane, day-to-day, what relationship should I choose, and that sort of clarity. Okay, so runestones. Runes can refer to the stones themselves or the symbols on them. And the symbols on them are usually different kinds of ancient runes. The Norse runes are the most common, but you may find Babylonian runes, Assyrian, I've seen some that were made with the Greek alphabet, with the Cyrillic symbols. So different kinds. You may find sets that are called runes that don't even contain symbols, and all of them are just different. And those ones are more common for tossing. So there's two ways to use runes. You can use them in spreads, and you can pick them out of a bag where you can't see which rune you're picking and set them in a particular slot on the table, just like you would with cards. Or you could toss them onto a mat or a surface of some kind, something that helps you read them. Or you could just toss them and then scry, which we'll talk about in a moment, and find a shape that helps guide you to read the rest of the reading. So there's a lot of different ways to use runestones. Runes are, there's less of them. Okay, there's only usually 25 or 26, sometimes 24. There's more or less depending on which alphabet you're using, basically. But they're usually made of this harder stone material so that you can toss them if you plan to toss them. Sometimes they're made of clay or wood or bone, depending on what you're going to do with them and what kind of energy you want to use. Obviously, if you're going to make use of death energy, the bone might make more sense. And if you're using something like clay or bone, you may not want to toss them. You may chip them. So you may do spreads with those. If you're using them to toss them, you want to toss them specifically, you may have harder stones, like that will hold up to being gently tossed on the floor onto a mat. And because there's fewer of them, each one of them has to represent more concepts at once. For instance, in the ancient rune set, there's a rune that represents horses. It represents travel and communication, because at the time, communication happened by horse. There's one that represents cattle and wealth, because at the time, if you were wealthy, you had a lot of cows. So with the runestones, oftentimes it helps to have an understanding of the historical context. And just like with tarot cards, if you're going to use the Norse runestones, then it's recommended that you sit down and read the poetry that was written about the symbols that has been attested to be fairly old. I think 800s, maybe older. And it allows you to form a relationship with the concept of the rune as it existed in its, in its conception. And so this is what I did when I first started using runestones that helped me be so successful with them. And we have that published on our website. But it's things like, so for instance, Feo, which is the cattle rune. Wealth is a comfort to everyone, yet each must give freely if he will glory in heaven. Success may be achieved in the face of opposition, is what I have written down as the meaning of that. And I think for me, it comes down to this being a representation of the threefold law. Wealth is a comfort to everyone, yet each must give freely if he will glory in heaven. So it's the idea that if you want to receive divine blessings, you have to give divinely. And for me, that comes down to this, summary, basically. So I've written this in my Book of Shadows, right? And that's how you do, divination. You write down, okay, here's the poetry. I meditate on the poetry, and here's my take on it. Short little sentence. So then I'll start doing readings, and I'll just glance around and see what I've written for each of these and be like, oh, here's a couple keywords. Okay. And then I'll read them all together, and that'll give me some understanding of what my unconscious mind is thinking about the subject. That is how you do divination. That is how you use runes. That's the Norse runes. You can use runes of all kinds. I have a set that are just seashells, and each one's a different color and slightly different shape. So I sat down and meditated with them and wrote down, what it all means. that's all in my Book of Shadows too. So I have different rune sets, different rune systems, all of it written down in a way that I could refer to it. I don't often do divination anymore as an elder. I tend to just come to conclusions about things, but and I use scrying most of all these days, which is a very advanced technique we'll talk about in a moment. First, let's spend some time on the easiest technique for all beginners. Absolutely the first thing you should do is get yourself a good pendulum. Pendulums rock. Pendulums help you find things. They help you answer yes or no questions. Pendulums just move, and they may be different for every reading. They may be different based on the pendulum. So some people will take the same pendulum and attune with every reading, and they'll start by asking basic questions that they know the answers to, like, am I wearing a green shirt? Okay, that means yes. Am I wearing anything orange? I am. No. Okay, no. It's shifting to no. Look. Okay, so now it's moving in a different way. I was like, am I? I'm not wearing anything orange. When the pendulum doesn't know, then sometimes it'll give you a bad reading. It's very useful for finding things, knowing what direction to move in, and it's very good for answering yes or no questions. It's based around the unconscious movement of your hand. Your hand very subtly moves based around what you unconsciously know to be true, and that influences the direction the pendulum is moving. But the problem is that if you are biased, you can influence it very easily and unknowingly. So usually it's more helpful when you're asking it yes or no questions that you don't care about the answer to. So if you're using it on behalf of other people, then it's more useful. Sometimes people will use different stone materials based on what kinds of readings they do. Amethyst is common because amethyst will help with any kind of divination. We have, ours is obsidian, which is bizarre, and it's this weird shape because we primarily use it like a Ouija board, and I usually use Death and Chaos with this pendulum. And this actually sits in our altar plate for the dead all the time with all of my relics of people that have passed on and their jewelry and coins and other crystals and things. And every so often I charge it. And I take it out usually around Samhain so that we can do like Ouija readings with a mat. And I let the pendulum swing over the mat. And I just sort of let my hand move with the pendulum in a very random, chaotic motion until it settles in one place and starts moving in a strong circle around a certain letter or a certain word, whatever it is that we're doing. So that's how I might make use of this guy. So that's pendulums. And I actually own 3. We have a lapis lazuli one that's big and heavy. That's a little bit better for just yes or no questions. We have an amethyst one that's more versatile that I've used to find things sometimes for yes or no questions. All sorts of things. So pendulums are like your go-to starter divination tool, probably. So it's worth getting one. Okay, scrying. As we mentioned earlier, scrying is really a form of meditation. It's really a form of sound or sight concentration where you are listening for syllables in some kind of medium. So that's common for communicating with spirits. Or you could be looking at something in order to find shapes in that material that are reminiscent of whatever your unconscious mind is thinking. And scrying is the most ambiguous. It's the most prone to bias. You may just see what you want to happen instead of what is going to happen. You have to be very skilled at meditation. You have to be very mindful in order to do scrying exclusively. If you're very good at scrying and dream interpretation, as you get further along your spiritual path, you may find you do it a lot more and you rely on the other methods less. But for beginners, scrying is usually the first stop. It's like, I don't really know what I need to know. I don't really know what the question is. So I'm going to just do this technique that can give me a broad, vague notion of what's going to happen. And then maybe I'll know what the question is and I can ask a conventional divination tool an actual question. There are many types of scrying. And like I said earlier, you may use scrying at the start of a rune session, right? To figure out what is the overall shape of this reading and how can I use that shape to guide me in interpreting the rest of the stones. Now, there are many kinds of scrying, and most witches will only do like one or two of these very well, because usually you just have an affiliation for one element over the rest. Some witches will have two elements, or some will have spirit and then a secondary primary element. It's very uncommon for someone to be good at all of these. If it's fire aligned, that will refer to looking into actual flames or candle flames, or at smoke, at coals, at ashes. Water scrying is usually looking for shapes in bubbles, or moving water, any kind of reflection or refraction. Earth-aligned scrying means looking at natural surfaces, trees, bark, leaves, rocks and stones and crystals, anything that is natural and has patterns on it. Looking into crystals in order to see reflections or refractions within the crystal itself, crystal ball scrying, that sort of thing, is usually aligned with the spirit. Air is anything that involves looking for shapes in clouds or listening to voices on the wind, which is something I learned from a young age from my grandmother, who was a witch. And looking into incense may be considered an air scrying technique, especially if certain scents or kinds of incense are used, like myrrh or frankincense. Then especially they'll view it as being air aligned as opposed to fire. It's kind of one of those gray areas. Spirit involves crystal balls, like I said, but also mirrors and any kind of reflective surface. Some will put tea scrying, where you're looking at tea leaves, in the spirit category. Some will put it in the water category, so that's another gray area. And then there's chaos scrying, which is looking for shapes in nonsense. And that can happen using static, or like those glitter lamps. I have one of those. That's my favorite kind of scrying, obviously, because if you're still watching this lecture series, you know me by now. But yeah, so that's scrying. It's often the first stop shop. You use it to get a shape, sense for the rest of the reading in rune casting. You may use it to ask, to learn what the question is, so you can ask a real question of a real divination tool. And you may also just do scrying just for the meditative benefits, just because it can help you break down something. It's also in line with hypnosis. Okay, hypnosis would be considered a kind of scrying. If you're relying on hypnosis to get into an altered state of mind so that you can make predictions, then that would be considered scrying, probably. But anywho. Astrology. We just spent a whole lecture talking about astrology. I hope by now you are convinced that you should use Stellarium or some other VSOP 87 correcting library to get your data so that you're sure your star chart information is correct and accounts for planetary precession and actually represents where the planets were in the night sky. It matters. I'm telling you it matters as a person who does astrology like a science. As close to a science as you can do astrology. It really matters. If your data is correct and you have your natal star chart and you understand it well enough to know how it influences you, then you can predict what will happen in your life, what you will be prone to do based on what the stars are doing. That is where the idea of the horoscope comes from. It is a type of divination called horary astrology. Horoscope. A horoscope cannot be created en masse. The most you can do is my new forecast series. Because I realize how hard it is to use Solarium and be a scientist like me, I went ahead and made a series where I look up all the information for you and tell you what it means. You're welcome to watch those that have so far come out with each Sabbath. I'd like to keep up that cadence because I actually watch them myself to be informed about what's going to come and put it in my planner, and it's a whole process. Horary astrology is different. Horary astrology is when you take the time that the question occurred to you to ask, and you look at the planetary positions at that time, and then you use that to provide context about what you must have been thinking and what the influence of the stars and the planets were upon you that brought this thought to you. And that will help you understand what it means, what it predicts, right? So horary astrology, very classic form of divination. It's a little less predictive. It's a little more for answering questions. It's not very common. You see it more commonly amongst psychics than Wiccans. So it's one of those that, be careful. People charge for their services. That's okay. That's not a problem by itself. Just be careful. Natal star charts are the ones that are a representation of where the planets were in the sky at your date and time of birth at your location on the earth. And those describe how the planets will influence you throughout the course of your life. And when the planets return to the position they started, that refreshes that energy and it gets a little bit stronger and more concentrated for a time. And that can be used in a predictive sense. I have predicted divorces. I have predicted the deaths of relatives, midlife crises, development of diseases and conditions, and the progression of those things is often influenced by a person's astrology and how the stars influence them in particular, because they don't influence us all the same way. We're not all going to get cancer because the stars aligned a certain way. But if someone is prone to cancer and is predestined to cancer for reasons that we don't really understand by science right now, maybe you can understand that kind of situation by looking at the stars, by looking at their palm, which we'll talk about in a minute, by looking at things that indicate some aspect of their physical existence that is less obvious, or some aspect of their metaphysical existence, like in the case of a spiritual stars, the star chart. How do those movements of the planets influence their metaphysical self, the soul of a person? You can only know that if you know their natal chart. So astrology is the most detailed, the least biased, because it requires the least amount of interpretation. There are 12 houses. There are, depends on who you ask, 10, 12 planets. There are 12 different signs. They all have a specific location. They form angles with each other. They form angles with the horizon. It is about 100 factors, and you have to read them all simultaneously to get a proper astrological reading from a person. It is very difficult. And I'd say the average professional astrologer is probably not very good at it. I think it requires an exceptional intelligence to understand the astrology. I think that we will find astrology is more commonly accepted in science when computers are doing it. Let's put it that way. So it's a large commitment. You have to understand the system. You have to know the natal chart of whoever is asking the question. You have to know where the stars are right now and what all of that means. Usually astrology is used for things like when is it going to happen? Okay. When is this event going to happen? Some other tool predicted something. I have a prophetic dream. I did numerology, perhaps, which we'll talk about in a second, and on the reading, and it gave me 2. Well, 2 what? 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 years? Well, maybe you'll go and look. Where are the stars going to be in 2 days? Where are the stars going to be in 2 weeks? 2 months? And maybe if the stars represent the same energy that your reading represents, and you're just like, ooh, synchronicity, look at that. That's the same energy. That's the same reading. Then you'll know this is when it's going to come to pass. So often astrology is used as the component for figuring out when something is going to happen once it is predicted by another tool, because it's less of a commitment. It's easier to do that than it is to do actual astrology to predict anything, which is a lot of work. It's a big commitment. It's very powerful. Dream interpretation. Many people will not call this divination. Many people will call this something else. I don't know. They won't call it divination because in the Bible, they were like, don't do witchcraft, don't do divination, you're going to go to hell, whatever. And what they were really talking about is grifting and soothsaying and fortune telling and all the same things that even witches and Wiccans will tell you are grifts. We all agree about that. People will misuse. People in need seek answers from religion. Do the math. Okay? But dream interpretation is the one thing that is endorsed by the Bible. Okay? It is a major feature. It is used by biblical figures in a capacity that serves God. It is allowable. So you will find a lot of people who are Christo-pagan use dream interpretation. If you are a member of the Open Minded Path and you are Judeo-Christian or Islamic, dream interpretation is a valid form of divination to certify as a member of our lineage because we're universalist. So we treat it as a form of divination, and we accept anyone that can use any forms of divination successfully. We just think that divination is your therapist, so you should be able to do divination if you're a spiritual leader in some variety or another. Not to mention that seeking an understanding of your dreams is the most common thing that I run into as a spiritual leader online and, in the greater community. Dreams have a lot of meaning. The interpretation of the dreams is very personal. A prophetic dream often will feel different. It will feel more vivid than an ordinary one, and it's usually more lucid. You're aware that you're dreaming. Even if you can't necessarily influence it, even if it feels like you're still just kind of acting out whatever's happening and you're just witnessing it, usually you'll still know that you're dreaming. Some people will have some control over the dream state, the sleep state. That just depends on the kind of person. But it's very easy to astral travel when you're dreaming. It's very easy to have interactions with divinity, to have visions of the future. In the dream state, you can better make sense of the real nature of time and space, to be wonky. And you can do in your dreams that which is not possible in reality. It allows you to play out scenarios. So there are times when you may have what seems to be a vision, and it's really dread. It's some emotion manifesting into your dreams that is not a reflection of what is likely to happen, but of your own fear. The nature of the dream, the tone, the symbols, we hold many of these things in common from one person to the next. It's all part of the collective unconscious. We all have a similar relationship with things like ravens and pumpkins and coffee and the sky, the ground, because we all live under the same physics and experience the same caffeine and have the same relationship with many of these things in a physical capacity. That's the collective unconsciousness. So looking up the dream meanings can be helpful. Having a dream dictionary can be helpful. I have a symbol of dream symbols written by a psychologist. that I think is pretty helpful. And the bulk of this book is all about how when you're interpreting dreams, the only person who really knows what any of the symbols mean is the dreamer, because it matters what the symbols mean to you. So when I'm helping someone interpret a dream, I start by just asking them, what do you think that means? If they're like totally clueless, I'll be like, well, birds usually mean this for most people. What do you think about that? And I'll just use the commonalities to guide their understanding of their dream. That's what dream interpretation should look like. It's less like a series of questions for a dictionary, a series of definitions. It's more like, okay, well, how do you relate to the concept of birds? What does skyscrapers mean to you, that one of them was blown up in your dream? Okay, that kind of thing. Dream interpretation is very powerful, very useful, and I think it's worth spending time on, even if you're terrible at it. I still think it's worth having a dream journal and spending time just being like, that was a weird dream. Why would I think that? What could that possibly mean? Ask some people about it. Just spend time with your dreams. Your dreams are a representation of the real, the true you. The you who exists when nothing else exists and time is not passing. That's the essence of you. So jotting down your dreams and spending time with your dreams is very beneficial, even if you're terrible at dream interpretation like I am. But you can be good at it just by knowing how to ask people the right questions and guide people to the right conclusions. And oftentimes that comes down to, they will say, I identified some deity in my dream, and I'll be like, oh, I know that deity / demon. Are you experiencing feelings of existential dread by any chance? You know, that kind of thing. Okay. Numerology. Numerology is like astrology in the sense that it's like a more scientific art. These are all arts. They all require interpretation. Astrology probably comes the closest to a science, but it's still an art, requires interpretation. Numerology is similar, but it's usually used in a predictive capacity to figure out when. Often you'll see people will do a rune casting, and then each rune is associated with a number, and they'll add up the numbers and get it down to a single digit by adding the two digits together. So if it's like 25, they'll go 2 plus 7, or 2 plus 5 is 7. So the number of the reading is 7. And they can do that for segments of the reading and do the math. They can do that for individual parts of the reading. You'll see systems of numerology, especially amongst like Orthodox Jews, that are bafflingly complex. And you're just like, do you go outside? Like, should I be concerned? But no. They're like really well thought out. They're amazing. And they'll use it to analyze every single letter in every single word of the Torah. Just like that kind of thing. It's crazy. But in Wicca, numerology usually is less of a focus. It's more of something that is used in conjunction with other tools to help make sense of timelines and when something might happen. It's used for planning. There are some systems in numerology. One of them you can see in the appendix in my book. It's a screenshot of my Book of Shadows where I copied down the Gardnerian system that I was taught by that witch queen I told you about. And I thought that their system applied to me, kind of. It was a little bit vague. I'm very divergent. You might have more success with it than I do, and you should look at the appendix. But for me, it was a little difficult to relate to, and it didn't really fully capture my essence. I have my own system of numerology that I devised, that I was informed recently is apparently based on graph theory, which is a kind of math. I don't consciously do math, but I guess I unconsciously do a lot of math. Anyway, that is also in the appendix, so you could make use of that one. And that one starts with, a point, right? The beginning. Then 2 points, a line. Then 3 points, a triangle. And what is the essence of each of those shapes? Okay, I meditated on that, came up with the system. All the runes are associated with it. You can see a picture of it on this slide. You can make use of that. You can look up other systems. You could devise your own. Numerology is about using numbers to spot patterns in nonsense. Okay? It's about using patterns to understand deeper meanings in how you personally relate to something. It's often used to predict the when. Okay? Often you'll use astrology and numerology side by side, just like I described, where the numerology will give you the period of time and astrology will give you the units. Days, weeks, months. I predicted that hurricane that flattened Puerto Rico. I never remember the name of it, but I had a prophetic dream about that happening. And then, and we actually had a member in our coven who was living there at the time. So that's probably why it was on my mind. She had family there as well. She was actually in school with me, but she had family there. And I had this vision of the hurricane happening in a very bizarre kind of situation where I was like negotiating with Cthulhu or some crazy scenario. It was not a representation of reality. And I was in New Jersey also, which doesn't make any sense because this happened in Puerto Rico. But then I looked at the numerology of the reading and added up all the symbols, and I was like, okay, 2. Do what? And then I looked at the astrology and looked where all the symbols are, and I was like, okay, something real is going to happen on this date. Oh, look, it's 2 months from now. And 2 months later, the storm was surely headed where it was going. Within 24 hours of that, it made landfall, and it was fun. And I knew that it was going to be Puerto Rico because of the member of our coven whose family was there. She was the main character of this dream. It was her and me, but she was like the focus. It was all about her and what she wanted. And I told her, you know, and she was like, oh yeah, there's supposed to be a bad storm season, you know, oh, 2 months, you think it's gonna happen on this date? Oh, okay, maybe I'll let my family know, you know, get them prepared. And that's the kind of thing that you can predict. I don't actually know how it worked out for them. I'm sorry. She's not part of our group anymore. I know that her family survives. That's about the extent of it. But I don't know if the prediction played a role in their survival or not. I'm not actually sure. But she was nonetheless grateful. And my point was to demonstrate that I knew where in the world it would happen by the relationship between this person and her family. And I knew when it would happen because of numerology and astrology. So that is how you'll often see people make use of them in their predictive capacity. Last but not least, palmistry, the reading of the palms. Okay, I spent a lot of time learning palmistry when I was younger because I would read any textbook that was given to me. We bought it at a book fair. And I didn't really take to it. I don't know if it was me or if I just couldn't really spot the symbols in people's fingers, or if they just weren't accurate. Maybe that was just a bad system. But the idea behind palmistry, I think, is probably sound. It's that your physical biology should, in theory, have some impact on the way your life unfolds. Sure, I could buy into that. People that are very experienced with palmistry will swear that it absolutely plays a role, and that by knowing the shape of your hand, they can tell you what kinds of events will happen in your life, what kind of health issues you might face and when, what kinds of personality disorders may develop and when. I've met people that say that they can absolutely predict schizophrenia by looking at a person's palm. So I don't know. This is probably the closest one that comes to fortune telling. I'd say getting your palm read by an experienced palm reader probably could be a beneficial experience, especially if you do it like once in your life and they're a very good palm reader who is reputable and they really have studied palmistry. I'd say that palm readers are probably the ones most likely to be grifting or scamming. Please don't hate me in the comments. We don't get a lot of comments these days, so hopefully that's fine. But it's believed to capture the essence of a person, their life challenges, their spiritual and physical genetics, as we talked about previously. And maybe you'll have it done once and you'll have some understanding of what's going to happen to you and when in life, and that can help inform you about what decisions to make or how to treat yourself as time goes on. And that could be the kind of how you might make use of palmistry. So in summary, tarot, cartomancy, and palmistry, they're all moderately difficult. They require some memorization, preparation, learning the tool, getting familiar with the cards, and meditation on the materials. But once you know how to use that particular deck, or you know what system of palmistry you're relying on, it becomes pretty simple for you to use those tools. In the case of tarot and cartomancy, you use them to answer specific questions that have specific outcomes. For cartomancy, usually those questions and answers are mundane. In palmistry, you are identifying the physical blueprint of that person's life, and maybe how that might influence them spiritually as well. The advanced tools, I put runes, scrying, and astrology. Runes are in the advanced category because it's a lot of interpretation and it's prone to bias. You have to be very mindful and aware of yourself in order to make use of those tools. And you can find evidence of that all over Norse literature. So anybody who is saying otherwise, that they're a beginner tool, have you read the books? Have you read the Norse Edika? Have you read the poems where Odin is preparing to do Seder? Because it's like a big ordeal. And as a person who started with runes, and a person who is historically known to be very unbiased, I will say that I had a lot of success with them from a very young age that most people just don't have with runes. Tarot is the much easier tool to get started with, even though it can still be difficult. Absolutely the most beginner tool of them all is the pendulum. Yes or no questions, directions, seeking, looking, finding something. Very easy to use, very difficult to master. Being able to ask any question of a pendulum and getting the right answer is challenging. It's about as challenging as mastering scrying. So scrying is an advanced tool because even beginners struggle with it. We had whole sessions where I would be impressed if our beginners saw anything in the crystal balls or in the, they'd be like, I saw something. And they'd be like, oh great, what was it? They'd be like, I was so excited I forgot. It's cute. So scrying, broad, vague notions. It's often a starter. It's rarely the full session of divination, but you will see people that are looking into a crystal ball and telling you your life's history and your future, and they know you, and they're looking at the ball and they just know you. They're like the wisest of us all. Okay, those are the gurus. Those are the wise ones. Those are the elders. Okay, if you've met a person like that, you should go back there. Now, if they're looking in the crystal ball and they're saying vague things that could apply to anybody, and they're looking up at you to see how you're reacting to it, grifting, those are grifters, okay? Those are making use of the ball because it's dramatic and it's easy to convince people something cool is happening. Now, also, if you use a crystal ball, cover it because it'll set your house on fire. Okay. Astrology is advanced. It's predictive. It's meticulous. It's also very easy to be unbiased using astrology. I will do natal charts for people where I'm like, is this accurate? I did not get this vibe at all. But I say it because that's what the chart says to say. And then they'll be like, oh my God, did you look me up? This is so accurate. So it's good. Dream interpretation, I consider that a beginner technique. It can be difficult to be good at dream interpretation, especially when helping others do dream interpretation. So it's another one of those that's easy to start and difficult to master, but it's very easy to start. Very easy. Anyone can do dream interpretation. Write down your dreams. Just jot them down. Look at them later. Practice mindfulness in your spare time. Practice lucid dreaming techniques if that's something you're interested in. Practice the astral meditation, astral awareness. And the visions and prophecy will follow. That is the easiest way to foster being psychic, is just to practice mindfulness. Look for patterns. Just because you're looking for patterns doesn't make you crazy, okay? Being crazy is when you're like, okay, this pattern means that they're coming for me. It's like totally different. Okay, anyway. Numerology, also a beginner technique because it's pretty easy to devise a system that's based around like a single digit. Like, okay, I give every letter in my name, every letter has a number, and I add it all up down to one digit, and 1 through 9, I've meditated on them, and this is what they mean to me. Easy. It's predictive, and it's easier, but that makes it more biased, right? So numerology, there's 1,000 different systems, and some of them I'm just like, I don't see how this works. And some of them I'm like, and some of them I devised myself. So those ones I definitely like the most. But yeah, always you can just come up with your own way to do divination, like at any time. It's really just about, the Rorschach test is divination. It's really just about bringing what's in your unconscious mind to consciousness, putting it into words so that you can take the context of the past, present, and future around you and gain some meaning from it. Divination is nothing more or less than querying space-time. Okay. So that takes us to the end here. For this week, this is the end of chapter 5. We read most of chapter 5 last time, so it should be pretty easy to get through the end of it here. And then for the homework, it's just 8 questions, the latter 8, and exercise 3, which is just about getting into divination. There's also some charts at the end of this chapter that summarize all of this information. So if you are falling behind in the reading and you want to just get the TLDR of this whole chapter, you can catch up this chapter by just looking at these charts at the end of the chapter. And for getting into divination, start by trying different kinds of scrying. If you know what your element is and you're really leaning towards one element or another, you may just have to try the one kind of scrying and you'll be like, oh yeah, this works. This is great. Look for shapes. You may not know what the shapes mean. Just look for them. Write them down. Move on. Come back. Maybe you'll see more shapes. You'll start to see patterns. That's the idea. You can make some runes or buy some runes. You can use seashells, rocks, wood chips. You could carve pieces of wood, pieces of bone. There's lots of different ways to do it. You could find a tarot deck or find a good card deck. Tarot decks are more Gaulish. So you're going to be thinking people that are more Spanish, Portuguese, French, Northern Italy or Italian. Okay, people with that kind of heritage gravitate more towards classic tarot. With the exception of the Italians, it can go either way. Some of the people with Italian heritage I've seen have gone towards oracle decks more commonly. The classic card deck and cartomancy is more Gaelic, and you find it more amongst people with Scottish and Irish heritage, or Welsh. The Welsh usually use their own runestones with Welsh symbols. Actually, is what I've seen. So, but there's a lot of variation, right? So that's just what people commonly do. But that's just to help you. If you're like, I have no idea where to get started, think about like, what did my ancestors probably do, right? So that can help. Okay, so just try different forms of divination. Go to festivals, find some tools, do readings for other people, have them do readings for you, and practice. And that's how you get good at divination. It's especially easy to practice when you're doing it on behalf of other people. So find some people that have some questions about what may happen and help them out. And that's how you learn how to do divination. Thank you for joining us today, and good luck finding your tools and seeing into the future. From all of us here at the Coven of the Open Mind, blessed be.